Most people picture biblical concubines as secret lovers or sexual slaves of powerful kings. The truth is something else entirely. What these women actually represented required a complex legal status, formal family contracts, and a social position that swung between legal dignity and brutal vulnerability. This is the story you were never told about concubines in the Bible. Put it in the perspective of the ancient world. Between 1800 BCE and 500 BCE, the family system of the ancient Near East operated on a mechanism that the modern mind cannot immediately process. The patriarch did not have one wife. He had an entire network of legally recognized conjugal relationships organized into precise hierarchical layers. At the top, the principal wife. Just below her, secondary wives bound by formal contract. And in the third layer, the concubines, known in Hebrew as pilegesh, a word that appears exactly 37 times in the text of the Old Testament. Here is the first detail that changes everything. The concubine was not a sexual slave. She was a second-tier wife, with defined legal rights, family protection, and in many cases children who were legitimate before the law. And there is more. A single concubine, in a bloody episode recorded in the Book of Judges, triggered a civil war that nearly wiped out an entire tribe of Israel. 40,000 warriors would die because of what happened to that woman. Her name was never recorded, but her body was cut into 12 pieces and sent to the 12 tribes as proof of a crime that no society could afford to ignore any longer. These two narrative threads will unravel throughout this story. There is more. The Hebrew term pilegesh has an uncertain etymology. Scholars in the Department of Semitic Languages at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem point to a possible common root with the Greek palakis and the Latin palex, suggesting that the concept crossed the entire ancient Mediterranean world. The word appears for the first time in the book of Genesis, chapter 22, verse 24, referring to Roima, concubine of Nahor, brother of Abraham. From that point forward, the Bible mentions concubines in at least 55 distinct passages spread across 17 different books. Consider the legal situation. The concubine entered the household of her husband through a formal process. In many cases, she was given by the principal wife herself, a woman who could not produce children. In others, she was acquired from her father for a reduced bride price, called the mohar, which could range between 10 and 30 silver shekels. For comparison, the mohar for a principal wife could reach 50 shekels, a value equivalent to nearly 5 years of wages for a rural laborer in the region of Judea between 1000 and 800 BCE. The first concubine to receive a proper name in the Bible is Hagar, and her case reveals layers that tend to go unnoticed. Sarah, wife of Abraham, was living through a situation that, in the Mesopotamian culture of the 2nd millennium BCE, was considered a social catastrophe. Barren for decades, more than 75 years without children. In a society where patrilineal inheritance defined the entire economic structure of a clan, this meant the end of the bloodline. Sarah makes a decision that to the modern reader seems incomprehensible. She gives her Egyptian slave to her husband as a concubine. It was not betrayal. It was not spontaneous humiliation. It was a legal procedure documented on cuneiform tablets found at Nutsi in what is now northern Iraq, dated to the 15th century BCE. These contracts, discovered in excavations between 1925 and 1931, show that a barren wife had a contractual obligation to provide a handmaid to her husband to produce offspring. The child born would be considered legally the child of the principal wife. Hagar becomes pregnant, and here the first abyss between the legal system and emotional reality opens wide. The concubine, having produced a child, begins to despise her barren mistress. Sarah reacts with violence. Hagar flees into the desert, pregnant, alone, without provisions. An angel finds her beside a spring of water. The passage is in Genesis chapter 16, verses 7 through 13. Hagar becomes the first woman in Scripture to receive a direct theophany, the first person, man or woman, to give God a name in the Bible. The name she chooses is El Roi, translated literally as the God who sees. Silence. An Egyptian concubine, a fugitive, pregnant alone in the desert, is the first person in Scripture to name the divine. Consider the broader legal landscape. The Code of Hammurabi, engraved on diorite stone between 1754 and 1752 BCE, dedicates at least 15 of its 282 paragraphs to regulating the status of concubines. The Mosaic legislation, centuries later, moves in the same direction. The book of Exodus, chapter 21, verses 7 through 11, establishes three basic legal protections for the Hebrew concubine. First, the right to food. Second, the right to clothing. Third, conjugal rights, known in Hebrew as honor, a word designating the affective and sexual care owed to her. If the husband failed in any one of those three obligations, the concubine had the legal right to leave in freedom, without payment, without returning the bride price. For the context of the second millennium BCE, that was a radical protection. For comparison, under Hittite laws of the same era, a concubine could be sold, transferred, or discarded at any time. Israelite legislation within the world of the late Bronze Age offered a level of legal dignity that no neighboring society practiced. The system functioned for centuries, and it began to unravel at precisely the moment the Israelite monarchy reached its peak. Consider the scale of the royal palace. King David, at the height of his reign between 1010 and 970 BCE, maintained 8 named wives and at least 10 concubines. According to the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 5, verse 13, Solomon expanded those numbers to vertiginous levels. 700 wives of principal status, 300 concubines, 1,000 women in the royal harem, as recorded in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 11, verse 3. To visualize the scale, imagine a residential complex larger than 3 modern football stadiums combined, with separate wings, dedicated corridors, eunuch guards at every gateway, and an internal hierarchy system involving more than 2,000 people just to manage the daily life of the palace's women. Archaeological records from the so-called City of David, excavated continuously since 1978, indicate royal residential structures occupying approximately 6 hectares in the royal family sector alone. Daily life for a concubine in Solomon's harem demanded brutal adaptation. You might not see the king for months at a time. Some concubines went 2, 3, even 5 years without any direct contact with their husband. Their function was to maintain the political status of the alliance each one represented, because every concubine in the monarchic context was also a living diplomatic treaty. Egyptians, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, Hittites. Each allied nation sent a princess or noblewoman as a concubine, sealing a political agreement through the body of a woman, and this was precisely where the most elaborate system of the ancient world generated its greatest fragility. Look at the religious scene. Each foreign concubine brought her gods with her, her rituals, her cultic requirements. Solomon, in order to maintain political stability within the harem, authorizes the construction of altars dedicated to Chemosh, the Moabite god, and to Molech, the Ammonite god, on the Mount of Olives. The passage is in 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 7 and 8. The biblical text attributes to that decision the spark that fragmented the kingdom. After Solomon's death, 10 tribes break away and form the northern kingdom. Only 2 remain with the house of David. The concubinage system, carried to its extreme, helped destroy politically what it had built. But the hidden dimension of the human cost has yet to be revealed. Look at the details of daily life. A concubine in the palaces of Jerusalem between 970 and 800 BCE had a physically exhausting routine, even if it involved no manual labor. She woke before dawn. She spent between 4 and 5 hours each day in ritual preparation, including baths with perfumed oils of myrrh, cassia, spikenard, and balsam. Preparing the body for a single night with the king could consume up to 12 months of specific treatments. The Book of Esther, chapter 2, verses 12 through 14, records that each candidate to the Persian harem underwent exactly 6 months of treatment with oil of myrrh and another 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics before a single audience with King Ahasuerus. Imagine the psychological attrition. 12 full months of waiting for one night, and if the king did not call her by name again, the concubine would spend the rest of her life in the so-called second house of the harem, under the custody of Shashgaz, the eunuch in charge of concubines. She would never leave again. She would never marry another man. She would never have children. 20, 30, 50 years of prolonged seclusion with no horizon of change. The mortality rate within ancient harems is difficult to calculate, but archaeological studies led by the Department of Biological Anthropology at Tel Aviv University, published in 2017, indicate that women from royal palaces of the late Iron Age had an average life expectancy between 28 and 33 years. For comparison, ordinary women from Judean villages in the same period reached between 35 and 42 years. The harem killed more than peasant life. Extreme sedentariness, an excessively rich diet, inadequate sun exposure, respiratory diseases from enclosed spaces, and, above all, recurring episodes of deep depression that ancient texts recorded as chamber melancholy. Months without ever seeing direct sunlight. And now we return to the first narrative thread, the Levite's concubine, the most brutal episode involving a concubine in the entire Bible. It is recorded in the Book of Judges, chapters 19 through 21. The chronology points to the period between 1150 and 1050 BCE, during Israel's pre-monarchic era. A Levite, a priest from the priestly tribe, had a concubine from the city of Bethlehem. At some point, she returns to her father's house. The Hebrew text presents a crucial translational ambiguity. Some versions say she committed infidelity. Others, based on the Codex Alexandrinus and manuscripts discovered at Qumran between 1947 and 1956, indicate that she grew angry at the Levite and left. The difference shifts the entire moral interpretation of the episode. The Levite goes to bring her back. They spend a few days at the father-in-law's house. On the return journey, they decide to spend the night in the city of Gibeah, in the territory of the tribe of Benjamin. At night, a group of men surrounds the house where they are staying. They demand the Levite in order to abuse him. The homeowner offers his virgin daughter and the concubine as substitutes. The Levite hands his concubine over to the men. She is abused throughout the night, found dead on the threshold of the door at daybreak. The Levite cuts the body into 12 pieces and sends each piece to one of the 12 tribes of Israel. The collective reaction was immediate. 400,000 warriors from the other 11 tribes assemble at Mizpah. They demand that Benjamin surrender the guilty men. The tribe refuses. Civil war breaks out. In 3 consecutive battles, approximately 65,000 combatants die. The tribe of Benjamin is nearly wiped out. Only 600 men survive, sheltering at the rock of Rimmon. To preserve the tribe, the other tribes provide women from Jabesh Gilead and Shiloh in an arrangement that involves still more violence against women. The concubine's name was never recorded, but her body changed the political map of Israel. Follow the stories of other figures. Bilhah and Zilpah, concubines of Jacob, produce 4 of the 12 sons who will form the tribes of Israel. Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher descend from these two women. Almost a third of the tribes of Israel traces its origin to concubines. Reumah, concubine of Nahor, produces 4 sons whose lineages would become significant neighboring peoples. Keturah, Abraham's concubine after the death of Sarah, produces 6 sons who would give rise to Arab tribes of Sinai and Western Arabia. Rizpah, concubine of King Saul, is the protagonist of one of the most extraordinary episodes of maternal grief in all of biblical literature. After Saul's death, 2 of her sons by Saul, along with 5 grandsons, are handed over to the Gibeonites and executed. The bodies are left exposed on a rock. Rizpah alone spreads sackcloth over the rock and remains there for months, driving away birds of prey during the day and wild animals at night. From the beginning of the barley harvest until the rains began to fall, approximately 5 to 6 uninterrupted months of vigil. The passage is in 2 Samuel chapter 21, verses 8 through 14. Silence. When David heard what Rizpah was doing, he ordered the collection of the remains and a proper burial. The act of an anonymous concubine maintaining physical vigil over unburied bodies compelled the most powerful king in Israel to correct a public injustice. The emotional cost to Rizpah is impossible to calculate. But the archaeological record points to temperatures between 38 and 42 degrees Celsius during the peak of the dry season in the region of Gibeah, dropping to 10 to 15 degrees at night. No shelter, no protection, alone. Consider the political dimension as well. When Absalom rebels against his father David, one of the acts that publicly confirms his usurpation of the throne is his taking of the 10 royal concubines whom David had left to care for the palace. Absalom pitches a tent on the palace rooftop in full view of all Israel and sleeps with the concubines. The act was not merely sexual, it was political. In the world of the ancient Near East, taking the women of a king's harem meant claiming the throne. The passage is in 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 21 and 22. After the rebellion is crushed and Absalom is killed, David returns to Jerusalem. The 10 publicly violated concubines are taken in, but the biblical text, with painful precision, records that David placed them in a house under guard, sustained economically, but without conjugal relations, until the day of their death. They lived in living widowhood for approximately 18 to 20 years, according to traditional chronology. They paid with their entire lives for the rebellion of a son who was not theirs, and the record does not even preserve their names. Look at the archaeological findings. At Tel Megiddo, excavations conducted between 1925 and 1939 revealed 10th century BCE palace complexes with clearly differentiated women's quarters. Smaller rooms, with approximate dimensions of 6 meters by 4 meters, grouped in wings that suggest concubine residences. At Hazor, at Lachish, at Samaria, similar patterns emerge. Concubines had their own space, but it was restricted. Ceramic vessels, spinning whirls, ivory combs, polished bronze mirrors, and ointment flasks found in these rooms confirm the daily routine of prolonged aesthetic care. At Ugarit, in present-day Syria, cuneiform tablets from the 13th century BCE record formal concubinage contracts. Each contract stipulates rights to food, clothing, inheritance for children, and return clauses in the event of incompatibility. The system was broad, articulated, and deeply embedded across the entire region in which the Bible developed. But the most brutal work of revelation had not yet even begun. Consider the silent transformation. From the post-exilic period onward, after the return from Babylon in 538 BCE, concubinage begins to disappear from Israelite practice. The late prophets, Ezra and Nehemiah, promote reforms that emphasize monogamy. The text of Malachi chapter 2, verses 14 through 16, records one of the first explicit condemnations of disrespectful treatment of wives. The system, which had functioned for more than 1,200 years in Israel's history, was being abandoned from within. In the intertestamental period, between 400 BCE and the birth of Christ, concubinage survives only in the restricted circles of Herodian nobility, under strong Greek and Roman influence. Herod the Great maintained 10 formal wives and several concubines, in an arrangement that scandalized both Pharisees and Sadducees of the period. By the time Jesus appears on the public scene in the early 1st century, the debate over concubinage had virtually disappeared from everyday Jewish discourse. What predominated were debates about divorce and remarriage, not about concubines. And here, the historical arc of nearly 2,000 years is complete. Witness the moment of cultural transformation. The teaching attributed to Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 19, verses 4 through 6, returns to the original principle from the book of Genesis: one man, one woman, one union. The phrase attributed to the teacher, quoting the ancient text, is literal, and the two shall become one flesh, not 2 plus 1, not 2 plus many. Only 2, the early Christian theology articulated in the Pauline letters between 50 and 65 CE, would consolidate monogamy as the exclusive standard. Concubinage disappears definitively from the Western religious horizon over the course of the first 5 centuries of the Christian era. The withdrawal of the concubinage system was not only religious, it was also legal. The legislation of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, under Constantine and his successors, progressively restricted the status of concubines. In the Justinian Code, compiled between 529 and 534 CE, concubines lost most of the legal protection they still retained, being reduced to something approaching a clandestine status. The model that had sustained the family structure of the ancient Near East for more than 2,000 years was dismantled within a few generations. Put it all in final perspective. The concubines of the Bible were neither absolute heroines nor passive victims. They were real women, with names that were partly preserved and partly erased, living within a legal system that offered concrete protections while simultaneously imposing brutal limits. Some produced patriarchs, others shaped the political map of a nation. Some received direct theophanies, others vanished into silent chambers for entire decades. The biblical text, in recording these stories without softening and without heroization, does something that few ancient texts do. It preserves the hidden face of the patriarchal system. It shows the violence, it shows the faith, it shows the injustice, it shows the occasional dignity that emerged even within profoundly unequal structures. Hagar fleeing into the desert, producing the father of the Arab peoples. Rizpah watching over her sons' bodies for half a year against vultures and jackals. The anonymous concubine of Gibeah, whose fate changed the political map of Israel forever. Each of these stories, by being preserved, offers the modern reader a historical mirror that returns to these women what popular memory has so often denied them. What the Bible calls pilegesh was not exactly what the contemporary imagination projects. It was something more complex. It was a social, legal, and human place where masculine desire, patrilineal economic structure, political necessity, and feminine dignity met in permanent tension. And the record remains there, intact, crossing more than 3,000 years of history, for those who know how to read beyond the surface.